All right, welcome back, Keeping It Rural listeners. This is a true Keeping It Rural original episode. We are here to learn all things about eggs, about chickens, and about the industry that feeds us and gives us so much protein and entertainment. I will say that chickens can be entertaining. Today with us is our special guest, and he is the president of Versova Management and Center Fresh Group. His name is JT Dean. Now, JT Dean is making all Iowans happy because he attended both Iowa State University and University of Iowa in computer engineering and business. But he is a true example of having a well-rounded experience. I talk to my students all the time about how when you fill your resume, you need to have experience in what you're going to do, or at least that drive to show that. And when I look at the profile of what JT has done in his past, this guy has done it all. Like, he has worked in construction management, operating the feed mills for the chickens, the breaking plants, managing the farms, but he's also done the egg processing business, probably a little bit of marketing and sales in there with that too, but the management of those chicken houses, packaging eggs. Truly, JT, you've done it all. So with that being said, I'm going to stop babbling because you have all of the knowledge to share with us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so really grew up in the egg business. And as you said, I started my career right out of college, coming to work for one of the companies that my family, along with several other families, were involved with. I was doing construction management and then got to operate some chicken houses and built, as you said, a feed mill and then a processing plant. I spent several years in the processing side of the business, handling liquid eggs, and then took on more leadership and management roles inside of the organization as some of the farms grew and we kept adding some of our operations. About 12 or 13 years ago, I took on the title of the Chief Operations Officer. And then about 4 years ago, took on the title of president of the organization. Today, we're a pretty good sized organization with operations in Ohio, Iowa, Washington, and Oregon states. We manage a little over 30 million laying hens, or about 10% of the flock in the U.S. We're owned by several families, and we have about 1,600 team members across the entire system. And in my role today, I get to help plan for the organization, some strategic vision, talent acquisition, and just helping to provide the strategic vision of where we're going and what we're doing, and making sure that all of our team members have the resources that they need to get their important jobs done every day.
Which is so important, having someone that's willing to direct and guide that focus.
Really, the origination of the company, we started really almost 30 years ago. And my father partnered up with a small producer here in Northwest Iowa and formed what we today call the Center Fresh Group. And we brought in some other families that were in the egg business or pretty close to the egg business, some feed businesses and things like that. But everybody that had a stake in the egg business or industry. And all of those, it was 8 families, and all of them realized that either they had to come together to get bigger, to compete in this really competitive environment of egg production, or they were going to have to get out of the business. And it's still, we have many different companies that we operate, and they all have a little bit different ownership, but it's still basically that same group of families that actually own the production. And then Versova Management as a company actually supplies some management services to all those different entities so that we have a common voice, a common set of guiding principles and core values, and that even though they're different companies, we manage them with one group of people. Versova Management as an entity, we have the senior leadership, and we have our veterinarians and our nutritionists, and basically any function that would touch multiple operating entities resides at the management company level. There are about 70 of us that are at the management company and help make sure that all of these individual farms are run the way they need to be run.
Wow. That is business done well right there. Yeah, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
You have this background in computer engineering of all things, right? And it sounds like your family has some history in poultry. So how did you personally become interested in poultry and eggs?
Well, it's fascinating. My father's story is really one of kind of the American story. He was a teenager that ended up getting a part-time job at age 16 at a local egg company in southeast Iowa, just doing general labor, cleaning up eggs off the floor, was not involved in any way, shape, or form with the owners of the company. And he was a disaffected teenager. He lost his father in an automobile accident. And he started working at this egg company and was successful, ended up going to Vietnam for a couple of years and did a tour, came back and got involved in supervisory positions and management with that company, and was eventually the first non-family member of that business to be offered an ownership position. They gathered eggs off at the time. It was common for a lot of farmers to have hens on the farm, whether that be a couple hundred or 500, or back in the 60s and 70s, like 20 or 30,000 bird flock was absolutely enormous. But that
Hmm.
existed, and this company gathered those eggs and packed them and then and brought them to retail. And so when I was a young kid, I got to go with dad to do inventories on Saturdays and got to go out to some of the farms that they serviced and was around egg grading and packaging machines. And then eventually that company had operations all throughout the Midwest. And when I was a young teenager and maybe a couple years before that, a baseball season would get over and I'd hop in with a truck driver and go to wherever dad was going to be at in as his role as a general manager. And then in high school and in college, summer breaks, I worked at just general labor at the farms and in some of the processing plants. But the expectation was, and dad had always, I have two brothers, and dad had always told us that animal agriculture is hard. Don't do it. Don't plan on it. He'll help us out paying for school and go get real jobs somewhere else. And so, yeah, I started out doing computer engineering and thought I was going to go there. And then some things started to change, and there was a couple of other opportunities. And dad offered me a job in my senior year of college and never looked back. And it's interesting because my younger brothers, one of them went into sales and marketing and had a successful career. And then he came back into the business in 2010 and is now our vice president of sales and marketing. And my youngest brother went to University of Iowa and got a business degree, went into investment banking and had quite a career in the business world. And my dad and I joked that it would be nice to have him in the business, but we'd never be able to afford him. Then as we kind of went through our growth curve and we got to a point, and my youngest brother called and said, Dad, I think I'm at a point where I can contribute to the business. And he joined in 2015 and is now our chief financial officer. And even though my father told us to go do something else and pointed us in different directions, we now are all back and helping to lead the organization. So it's as far as egg production specifically, and I think this would be common to many people that are involved in agriculture and animal agriculture, is it gets in your heart and it gets in your soul. And I'm very passionate about producing food and have just come to really love this business and wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, and what a full circle thing for your family too. I bet that's just enjoyable. You probably never run out of things to talk about, and just fun for all of your brothers to come back together.
I'm sure as many people that listen to your podcast involved in family farm operations, there are really good things and there can be some really challenging things.
So sibling squabbles are still existent.
That is fair to say. We just make sure that it happens behind closed doors and,
Yep.
and never in front of the team. But no, it's we are having a blast working together, and I think my dad is really enjoying it as well. And we have, like I said, we have other family owners, and we have other members of other families that are involved in the business too. And so we've gotten pretty good scope, but still trying to keep a family feel. In fact, our company tagline is a family of companies and a company of families, and so we try hard to live that.
You definitely do live that. When you were a kid and you were working here, and it sounds like working was an opportunity, but it also sounds like it was something that was expected. Sometimes kids that grow up in production of any sort find that to be fun. And sometimes they're like, oh, this is a chore. I don't want to do this. Where were you on that spectrum?
Well, I would, yeah, even as a kid, being in the plants, dad would pay me a quarter an hour to go pack eggs. And I think that was well under minimum wage, but I certainly wasn't going to bring that up at the time. But I think to your point, in our household, it was always expected that school was first and grades were first. And there was an expectation that we would participate. But after that, if we could be successful in that, then yeah, by all means, go out and have a job and hold a job. And for myself, it was from age 14 onward, was really employed and worked as many hours as I could, both inside. In high school, during school times, I worked fast food. Wasn't really working
Mm.
out at the farm at the time. It was just wasn't quite convenient. It wasn't quite the right hours and so forth. That was the expectation and never really had a challenge working hard after that. And again, I think it's probably like a lot of people in the agricultural community.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you feel miles ahead because you have that work ethic, and it's definitely proven to be successful for you as well. So
Uh,
you have been a part of this industry for some time now. What are some of those significant changes that you've seen in the egg industry over the years?
Yeah, so really a great question. And going back to really an interesting dynamic, and I'll focus on two things to answer that question. The first one is just structurally from the 1930s until where we're at today. Egg farming started out, as I said, being on the farm. Iowa had a tremendous number of egg laying hens in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. But as our country developed and as population started shifting, away from the farm, so did the birds. And the birds actually went, and a lot of the egg production was located out on the coast. And then as we got into the economics of transportation and grain costs and all of that, starting in the 80s, really a lot of the egg production moved back to the Midwest. And so much so that Iowa was below 10 million egg laying hens. And at one point in the middle 2000s, we were over 60 million laying hens in Iowa. And so there's been this big shift of consolidation, but also where the birds are located at. And I think it makes sense that it costs less to ship eggs than it does to ship corn and soybean meal. The economics make sense. The other real transformation that's happened and really in the last 20 years are the advancements in animal welfare concepts and programs in the U.S. egg industry. Our national trade organization, the United Egg Producers, they represent about 90% of the hens in the U.S. When some corporations and quick serve restaurants started coming up with animal welfare standards to improve animal welfare in the 90s, we recognized as an industry that having a kind of a patchwork quilt of different standards was going to be a challenge. The United Egg Producers put together a scientific committee, and we left them alone as a really a third party, but said, hey, scientists, come up with an animal welfare program for us as an egg industry. And they did that. And the industry decided to implement that essentially across the board. Well, it's voluntary, of course, but was eventually adopted by, 80 or 90% of the egg laying hens in the US. And so this is an animal welfare program with a very robust audit program. It's audited by third party. And there were quite a few things that gave the hens more space and codified some practices and made sure as an industry that we were doing the things that we needed to do to meet consumer and end user expectations.
Yeah.
Um, More recently, starting really in the early 2010s, you started to see more pressure from animal rights and animal lobby groups. And into 2015, we as an industry started seeing a lot of commitments by retailers, food service companies, quick serve restaurants, food manufacturers, and so forth to move to cage free. We've also seen states pass ballot initiatives and craft legislation to mandate cage-free production in those states. And just going through the list, California, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Michigan, and a few others, it represents almost 100 million consumers that live in states that have made legislation to move and make the change to cage-free. Many of our end users, those restaurants and retailers and food manufacturers, made commitments in that 2015, 2016 timeline to make the conversion anywhere from 2022 to 2026. And some of those commitments have now been softened a little bit to move out to 2030. So egg producers have had to invest in really doing the conversion. And in the last 10 years, our industry's gone from under 7% of all eggs being a specialty category, including cage free range, pasture, and organic, to over 40% today and growing quickly. And the economic impact, the industry has invested many billions of dollars to make this change. Those would really be the two biggest things. And I think every company that produces eggs today is dealing with this question of how do I meet and how do I respond to what the consumers in these states and what these end users have said they would want. How do they make that financial commitment? And even a smaller producer, the financial commitment to make this conversion is just simply enormous. There are a lot of still family owned farms that are 500,000 or 1 million birds, which in our industry today would be considered average or even towards the small side. If you can imagine a family farm that has a 1 million bird farm that maybe has 8 to 10 laying barns, to do that conversion, they might be looking at 40 to 60 million dollars to
Yeah,
make
it's
that
huge.
conversion. It's absolutely incredibly challenging. And then making sure that we have the right relationships with those end users and with our customers to say, hey, we're making this investment, but we certainly need to make sure we understand what the market's going to look like and what our contract looks like, and making sure that we're meeting all the stakeholder interests.
Yeah. And what a good reminder that even as a family farm, it is still a business. And so some of those logistical concerns, yeah, we are working for the consumer, but how do we do this and still stay afloat? That's certainly been a challenge.
I think everybody that's in animal agriculture at one time or another has probably worked for free or even below that. And certainly in the egg industry, there have been some pretty challenging times economically and some crazy times too from a market perspective. But I think that's what we get operating in a commodity environment I think everybody in agriculture is well aware of.
For sure. There was once upon a time where I feel like some of the smaller farmers or at home farmers could probably ignore those markets and just do what they do, right? Hope for the best. We are not at that point anymore. Consumer trends drive everything we do. And if we're not watching prices from one day to the next, something could pivotally change. How do you think that public opinion has really changed or affected the egg industry? Whether it's myths or perceptions, maybe it's a TikTok trend of why you should or shouldn't eat eggs. What has impacted you guys?
Well, certainly over the years, I would call out cholesterol as one. Back into the late 70s and early 80s, there was a push that eggs and the cholesterol in eggs were simply causing heart disease. And I think over time and as science has evolved, we've now kind of made the transition back into almost a superfood again.
Yeah,
And the way that impacts consumer behavior and what they expect and what they want to buy and how even how we produce eggs and how we feed eggs has certainly changed. It leads right back into also, of course, the consumer understanding what are all these different kinds of eggs and what do consumers really want, whether it be that organic or cage free or free range. Certainly that opinion has had tremendous impact. And then I think as we move into this world that we're moving into, referencing sustainability, we have to be conscious of how we're treating the land and how we're using our resources and making sure that we are sustainable. And sometimes that becomes a buzzword, but there can be very real things in the egg production space and in animal agriculture where we can do some very concrete things to show that we care about those things and that we care about all the stakeholders and we care about sustainability. And I think that's going to continue to become more important to consumers in
yeah.
animal agriculture as we maintain our social license to operate.
Absolutely. I would assume there were things you were already doing sustainability wise that it's like, wow, if we just would have promoted this, we probably would have been 10 steps ahead.
It's been exciting, and yeah, you're exactly right. Our company we do some business with Walmart in the shell egg space, and they've had their project Gigaton going on for a number of years. And you're exactly right. We've been doing a lot of documentation for them in some of those practices, such as water conservation, precision agronomy for our litter products, switching all the farms over to LED bulbs instead of using incandescent bulbs, and just waste elimination and more efficient utilization of resources, trying to repurpose eggshells, for example, and
Oh,
into
yeah.
a good product, and just absolutely trying to make sure that we're eliminating as much waste on the farm as what we can. Our company, we now have a director of sustainability, and here recently we just released our first sustainability report. The amount of data that has to be collected and making sure that data can be audited and representative of what we're doing. It was a major undertaking and a major project, but also exciting and something that I've been really excited about how much benefit we've seen with our team members and even the people that work for us and how much they care about that and what our commitment to doing that means to them and
Mhm.
retaining our talent.
Yeah, it's one of those areas in the business that truly impacts all of us equally, right? The air we breathe, our kids in the future, the land that we use, it's all going to be impacted by that. So it's cool that it's something that whether you are pro egg, maybe you follow more of a vegan diet, or you're super animal agriculture, we can all get behind that. So very cool. Now there's lots of other buzzwords, and you started talking about these that as egg buyers head to the grocery store, consumers have had their alerts on. There's been a lot of, okay, what do I need to watch out for? And it's not what do I need to look for that's good, it's what do I need to avoid. I feel like that's the mindset so often when they go shopping. So help us understand some of these labels that we need to look for when it comes to egg cartons: free range, cage free, maybe no label at all.
Yeah, such a wide range, and you're exactly right. Labeling and what that carton looks like and what those terms mean are really interesting. I guess I want to start out by saying that the eggs that I bring home are conventional standard regular eggs. That's what my family eats, even though we produce basically all of those different things in one form or another. So generally, most eggs that you find in the retail are conventional eggs. That means that the birds are housed in a barn. Almost universally in the industry, that would be computer controls for lighting and feed and documenting all of the environmental things that are happening inside of the building. The birds are in enclosures or cages. I think as an industry, we hate that term, but they're in enclosures. Cage free generally means they're inside of a barn, but they're not enclosed. They have access to scratch areas, dust bathing areas, nest boxes, and perches. All these additional things, and they can go up and down multi levels and move around, and they're not enclosed. But we've added all of these things to allow them to express their natural behaviors. Free range and pasture are the inside of the barns basically look like cage free, those same accoutrements, but the birds are then granted direct access to the outdoors. And the difference between free range and pasture raised are simply the amount of space that's allotted for the outdoor space, with
Yeah.
pasture being quite a bit more space. Organic, of course, organic is governed by the National Organic Standards Board, which is part of USDA. So it's really a government regulated and audited program. The birds have to be fed an organic feed. They have to have access to the outdoors, and there are some other rules that are changing inside of that, and substantial amount of rules to be able to be called organic. Some of the other labels, it's illegal and it's been illegal to feed steroids and hormones. So those labels could be on every egg. There are nutritionally enhanced eggs for different omegas. Those have to be tested and validated. So I think a consumer can have some trust in that. They need to make their own decisions on how important that is to their particular health situation and whether that's additive. There's no nutritional difference between a white egg and a brown egg. That's really just a consumer preference thing. It's entirely due to the genetics of the flock.
I think you probably just blew a bunch of people's minds when you said that, because
Uh,
everyone thinks the brown egg from the farm, as
yep.
if the white egg doesn't come from a farm. But
So you can usually, when you look at a chicken, a little fun fact, you can actually usually tell what color an egg the bird will lay by the color of its earlobes. They have little
ah,
spots on the side of their cheeks, and so you can have white feathered birds that lay brown eggs, and it's pretty rare, but you can have a brown feathered bird. That doesn't necessarily hold true for some of the really unique and purebred lines, but for the regular commercial genetics, that's generally true. And then I guess I would also add too that for the vast majority of the industry, whether it's conventional or cage free or pasture or free range, almost all of those production systems will have had a third party audit to make sure that those practices align with the published standards. And those standards are available at either United Egg Producers or American Humane Certified or Humane Farm Animal Care. All those are available online. And so it's really very standard for those to be well audited, and consumers can be comfortable with that. So I hope I answered that
yeah.
question.
Oh, I think that was a wealth of knowledge. And I just want to go back to the couple that we see all the time. And I grew up in a dairy family. And so when we see things like no RBST on this label, and we're like, nope, there's no RBST anywhere being used except what's naturally already there. There's some frustrations, I'm sure, from a production side when you see things like no growth hormones added, no steroids, anything like that. Like the simple truth is what, JT?
Well, simply steroids or hormones, those have been illegal and they've never been added. There's a conversation to be had about antibiotics, and no antibiotics ever has become a label point. I would say for our company, and I think this is standard in the egg industry, the only time we would use an antibiotic is when directed by a veterinarian. The
Yep.
idea that you're adding an antibiotic as a growth promoter or anything like that, that just hasn't been regular practice. I think there was a time 30 years ago that was done, but simply not the case today in the vast majority of cases. And like I said, in our case, we have two veterinarians on staff full time. And anytime we would use an antibiotic, it's for an animal health concern. And it's rare. It's very rare.
Yeah. Yeah. So know that, listeners, all of your eggs are going to be steroid, hormone, all of those things. They're going to be free of those. Our eggs are safe. And that's what I love about that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about cage free versus free range. We know the pros of them because people have been hammering those and why we need them. Why would someone still use that traditional and conventional raising system with the buzzword cages?
So it's actually fascinating. When the egg industry saw this trend coming, we actually put together a group, and when I say we, it was quite a group of stakeholders. We put together the Coalition for Sustainable Egg Supply, CSES, and that
Mhm.
research is still out there. And we thought that, hey, we need to put together a group of scientists, we need to get academicians involved, and we need to do an intense research study on what is the best when looked at from a holistic perspective, from a perspective of animal welfare, employee welfare, overall cost, potential foodborne pathogens. And there was all these things that were measured. And we, as an industry, thought at the time, okay, well, if we can present the science, then this will help us craft the direction that we need to go. And it was fascinating. The outcome of that study said that actually the best thing, when looked at holistically, was what we now call an enriched cage or a colony cage, which is still it's a system where the birds are enclosed, but we added a lot of those accoutrements like in cage free, the nest box and scratch areas and perches. But from several metrics, that ended up really being the most ideal setting. Unfortunately, it still became just a little confusing about, well, it's still this or it's still that. And at the end of the day, the cage free production model kind of ended up winning out as, all right, this is the next direction we're going to go. There's significantly an additional cost to do cage free over conventional, both in what it costs to actually build the facility, but there's also a higher feed cost when doing cage free. In some ways, it can actually be a little bit more, you have to do a lot more animal husbandry and animal care to make sure that the birds actually don't experience more injuries than in the
Yeah.
conventional system. And so I think, like all things, there's a huge balance. And I would say that from my perspective, at the end of the day, the consumer should have the right to choose. I would hope they would get educated and look at some of these resources that are online. But I'm happy to produce whatever the consumer thinks is best. And as I said, in our company now, we do produce basically the whole gamut.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. You have the whole buffet of eggs right there. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the chickens specifically. Now, I've avoided this topic. I am personally afraid of chickens, but we are going to go into it anyway. The actual chicken that is an egg layer, we know they are different than meat birds. And we
Yes.
know that, like, if you tried to use an egg layer for meat, it wouldn't work very well.
That's absolutely correct. I think the proper analogy, and it's actually an interesting quirk of history, that the current genetic supplier to most of the U.S. egg industry and global was actually at one time started as a division of Pioneer Seed Corn.
Oh, wow.
Henry Wallace, H.A. Wallace, I think, actually took it on as a project. And so they started doing the genetic selections and having the pure lines of birds and then developing the genetic strains that are in use in the egg industry today. And one of the predominant strains was actually developed in the 1970s and is still in use today. And
Huh.
you're exactly right. The animal that's an egg layer versus a meat bird, two completely different things today. And genetically, naturally, through normal genetic selection, not any modifications, or they're not genetically modified, but through natural selection and careful choices on looking at how birds are producing, they produce this genetically similar strain that we get as day old baby chicks. But specifically, a meat bird might take 6 or 8 weeks to come to full maturity as a 5 or 6 pound roaster or broiler that's ready to go to market. It takes
Yeah.
us 16 weeks just to grow a day old baby chick into being old enough to become an egg layer. And at a mature weight for that bird is 3 pounds. And very
Huh.
rarely will they get above 3.5 pounds. And genetically, they're designed to put all that energy into egg production and not into muscular development. So you're exactly right. They're really completely different and specifically selected for the work that we need them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like humans have evolved, there's also that evolution of animals too. And so when we talk about the lifespan of an egg layer, they are half the size of a broiler or a meat chicken. And so when you look at them, totally different animal. But what is the lifespan of both of them?
Yeah, we get a day old baby chick from the genetics company. We move them into what we would call a pullet or a brooder house. So those facilities have special adaptations and special equipment to handle the day old baby chicks, and they'll stay in that environment for basically 16 weeks while they're grown up into a mature hen. They'll then get moved into the lay house where they will be for generally 16 to 24 months. And during that time, they'll lay varies, but 400 to 500 eggs per hen housed is what we would expect in that time.
Wow. Okay, that is not what I expected at all. So on an average year, because they don't lay one per day necessarily, what is the ratio?
When a young flock comes into production, they're very efficient and they're able to turn out basically an egg a day. It's not uncommon for us, out of every 100 hens in a young flock, we'll get 96 or 97 eggs a day. And as they age a little bit over that time, that will naturally start to decline. I think everybody would understand that it takes a little bit longer as they age. And at the end of that time, they'll probably still be above 80% rate of lay, maybe into the high
Wow.
70s. Another way to think about it is for every hen space that we have on a farm, we would expect 24 to 25 dozen per hen space per year.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And from a science side here, we talk about plant biology and we talk about animals needing male and female to reproduce. How are chickens producing eggs every single day?
Yes, the genetics companies are actually the only ones that have roosters. And so they, of course, to produce a fertile egg, there has to be a male and a female. And I think your listeners can probably understand the biology of that. When the day-old baby chicks come to us, they're basically all females. As we grow that bird up, it's actually an evolutionary trait. The bird responds to the length of daylight. And as a day is getting longer, that signals her that, again, from natural evolution, a day is getting longer. That means spring and summer is coming. That means I can lay an egg because I'm going to have less biological demand for heat. And I can make sure that egg gets to the point where I can have its baby. So when we bring that 16-week-old bird into the lay house, we start at just on average, let's say 12 hours of light. And when we feel like they're ready to come into production, we actually will start increasing that by a half an hour or an hour a week. And that signals them that, hey, summer's coming, it's time to come in production. And they start laying eggs. But of course, without, with no roosters, there's no fertilized eggs or anything like that. So the egg as you see in the store. And that's how we get them going. And they keep going.
So every story you have heard about someone cracking open an egg and there being a baby chick inside is not because of science or biology. It's because someone was picking up something where a rooster was.
Rooster is required for that to happen, yes. Could there be a rooster? Yes, but also I think as most people have seen at some point in their elementary education, a lot of schools have an incubator somewhere and they incubate eggs. Those
Mhm.
eggs need to be very well specifically cared for and kept at the right temperature for that embryo to develop. Very uncommon. And furthermore, the technology that we have on the farm when we process the eggs and weigh them so that each one can be sized and they're washed, they're candled. So we're checking for any internal defects. And we actually have technology that flashes a light inside the egg and we can tell if there's any blood in the egg. Just
Mm.
in case in that scenario, all those are removed and shouldn't ever be sent to the consumer. And so in the commercial setting, we have many control steps to prevent that from happening. It would be very unusual.
Yeah, something we can trust for sure. We're just
Yeah.
busting so many myths here. I love it, JT. Okay, so why are we raising all white eggs?
Well, it's really consumer preference. If you go out to the Northeast, there's substantially more brown egg producers out in the Northeast corridor, Pennsylvania, New York, and Maine in particular, where the consumer prefers that.
Mhm.
You know, white eggs, interestingly, just again, because of that natural and that genetic selection, white layers tend to be a little bit more efficient. They can produce more eggs on the same amount of feed that a brown bird can. There's some different behavioral issues between the two, generally between a white bird and a brown bird, that over time, the egg business, we saw that, well, hey, we could produce a little bit less expensive product if we stayed in the white birds. And that was the driver. But today, as I said, our company produces white eggs and brown eggs, and we respond to the market and what the consumer wants.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know if it was this is the way the genetics are, these are the best for it. That's cool. When we look at raising animals in the Midwest, it makes so much sense to me why we would have to have in barn situations. We see winters, and even out east and out west, we still see these crazy weather patterns that when you think about a 3.5 or just a 3 pound animal, they're not going to be able to survive in that if they're outdoors. Is that a common trend everywhere, or are there a lot more of those cage free and free range pasture chickens in the southern states?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. The cage free are still in the barn environment. And, that environment is, they don't have access to the outdoors. And the barn environment is controlled with supplemental heaters and fan ventilation. In the really cold climates, you can give birds access to the outdoors. That doesn't mean they're going to go there. And so, in those climates, if you have a really inclement day, heavy snow or rain, it's in the guidelines, and the producer would have the ability to say, no, I don't think we're going to let the gals outside today, and they can do that. But as far as where that production is today, it's all over the US. There is that pasture and free range all over. And I don't think it really consolidates more to the south part of the US. We have a good partnership with a company that does the free range eggs in Ohio, and there's a substantial amount of production in southeast Iowa and Missouri, a lot of those specialty eggs. So it's not
Huh.
uncommon over here.
And it does. It really makes sense as to what you said when if birds are habitual, just like humans are. If we don't want to go outside, we're not going to go outside. So if it is freezing cold and it's a risk to my life, I'm probably not going to do it. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about nutrition of eggs. This has been something, and we talked about cholesterol a little bit earlier, but that has been highly debated. Growing up in the dairy community, we always talked about butter and butter versus margarine. People thinking butter is the worst thing in the world for you. And then there's these diets where all you eat is fat and butter and bacon. It's crazy how these perceptions can change. But when we look at an egg, the nutrition hasn't really changed that much, right? So it is a nutritional powerhouse. What are the straight facts we need to know?
Well, I was hoping you were going to ask this. There's a ton of information out there, and particularly I would direct your listeners to the American Egg Board website. It's incredibleegg.org. That's our checkoff organization, and there are so many resources from data and facts, recipes, all kinds of information on everything about eggs, and it's just a tremendous great resources. But specifically, each egg generally 80 calories, 6 grams of protein, vitamin A, vitamin D, folate, B5, B12, B2, selenium. One of the things that I wanted to mention that we've done some research on as an industry is the benefits for expectant mothers. Very documented. So choline, lutein, DHA, and zeaxanthines, all really important for fetal brain development. There's plenty of research out there, but the nutritional benefits for expectant mothers are really out there. Lastly, I would just say when you look at the cost of protein in your diet, eggs are always one of the most affordable on a serving size protein. And so just I think we're still really trying to deliver that exceptional value to the consumer for a good nutritious product.
100%. Yeah. And what are we talk about salmonella a little bit, and the peanut industry has struggled with this. The poultry industry has gotten hit for this as well. And then you look at these commercials and people are drinking raw eggs. What do we need to know? What do we need to avoid? What's the truth?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk about it. I think many people are aware that eggs don't necessarily have the best food safety history. That was identified by both the industry and certainly by the federal government. And we've made just tremendous strides in the last 20 years. The Food and Drug Administration came out with a specific egg industry legislation 2010 we call the egg safety rule. And this is specifically in response to the potential risk of Salmonella enteritidis. And that's a specific strain of salmonella that has an affinity for egg laying hens. So that's one we really focus on. But that rule incorporates best operating practices such as testing of the young hens before they're moved into the lay house, environmental testing in the lay house at various ages, gathering requirements and refrigeration requirements for the eggs, sanitation practices, record keeping. Just for example, so over the course of a flock, we will go in and test the environment of that lay house numerous times for the presence of salmonella in the environment. That doesn't necessarily mean there's any salmonella in the egg. That just means that there could potentially be a bird in that entire flock that was exposed. If that comes back positive, the entire industry is required to do this. We divert that flock to the liquid egg market so it'd be pasteurized and none of those eggs could end up on the store shelf. And this is available from FDA and from various sources, but the general consensus is that we've now gotten to a point where it's between 1 in 20,000 eggs and 1 in 80,000 eggs could potentially be contaminated with salmonella, which is, I think there's probably a lot of people that wouldn't like me to say that it's even a possibility. But
Right.
with proper cooking and with just general observation of sanitary practices, eggs are incredibly safe today. And just because of that egg safety rule and the incidents that, as an industry, of course, and through United Egg Producers, we generally get some data of what number of instances of positive tests are, and it's gotten very low. It's quite impressive how that program has been developed. And so, in a good partnership at the end of the day with the federal government, with the Food and Drug Administration, to make eggs as safe as possible, and really driven some good accountability and good results for the egg industry. I will tell you that certainly, like any family, we occasionally make our cookie dough, and I don't have a hesitation with my kids having some of that raw cookie dough.
Perfect. I love that. I won't go drinking a raw one soon, but it's not because I'm worried about salmonella.
Certainly, also, I guess one other thing I would add is, and to maintain that, it's important that consumers continue with that good refrigeration practices. I
Mhm.
would say that the best thing that consumers can do is make sure that the kitchen is clean, make sure your hands are clean, and make sure that refrigeration is there when you do bring those eggs home from the store, both from a quality perspective and a food safety perspective. Get them in the fridge, make sure they stay there, and that safety factor will be there for a long time.
Love it. How long should eggs last?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and one that could be debated. Certainly, and there's a lot of debate even at the federal level with the FDA today about what does on all foods, not just eggs, but what does a sell by date mean when you see that package, or what does an
Mm,
expiration date mean, or what does a best buy date mean? And I think you're actually going to see some changes that are going to come to the entire food production industry about standardizing how do we properly communicate to a consumer, whether we're talking about a quality degradation,
yep.
which in the case of eggs, there's a double A egg and an A egg and a B egg that are different quality standards. And egg, as it ages, will have reduce in quality from an internal perspective. The egg
Mhm.
whites can potentially get a little more runny, and you might not have the yolk stay in the right place anymore. That's different from a food safety issue. I would generally say that from the day you buy the eggs, 30 days properly refrigerated is fine.
Mhm.
That information is out there. I think in most cases, you're going to have a quality issue before you're going to have a food safety issue. So those are two different things. But I expect
Yep.
some, like I said, over the next several years, I think we're going to have some changes that are going to make it more clear for the consumer to understand, all right, here's what I'm buying and here's what I need to do.
Which I am personally excited for because you wonder. And I grew up with a mom that said, it said it expired last week, but it's yogurt. You'll be fine. So there's always those at home rules, and everyone does it so differently. It'd be nice for some transparency across the board.
Yep.
Let's talk about you guys raising laying hens. What are your biggest challenges?
I think we touched on it, and I'm going to use that buzzword again, making sure that we're sustainable. And
Mm,
what does that mean in the context? That certainly includes taking care of the environment, which I think is what people think of in the traditional sustainable word, but it's also making sure that we're providing for all of our stakeholders, our team members, the communities we operate in, our family farm owners and partners, our customers, making sure that we're doing all of the things that we need to be doing to take care of all those constituents and stakeholders so that we maintain our social license to operate, so that the communities that we reside by say, yeah, we like that egg farm there. It's a positive thing for our community. The consumers know that they're getting a safe, wholesome product, and that our regulators and our communities know that we're taking care of the environment, and that our team members feel like, all right, I'm in a safe place and the company's taking care of me. All those things, and balancing all of that is really, I think, to answer your question, the biggest challenge. I talked about the conversion to cage free, and we're facing that and we're dealing with that. But really, even that is a broader part of making sure all of those other things are taken care of. And I think there was probably a time in many businesses where the bottom line was the biggest thing. And that's certainly important. You can't be sustainable if you're not profitable at some point and level, but making sure that we're balancing all those factors and taking care of all those stakeholders are, from my chair, the biggest challenge.
Oh, for sure. I could see that. And you have held many different hats or roles throughout your time in this industry. We talked about how you've done it all. You've been on the construction crew, you've helped with feed mills, you are actually the president of your company. You also hold roles on different boards and associations, such as the Iowa Poultry Association, and you've been involved with some of that legislation that's happened. It is so clear that there is a future in poultry. And so, what are some of those career type opportunities that you think are going to be in demand in the future?
Well, I'll start out by saying thank you for acknowledging that. I've had a lot of different roles. I'm actually the current vice chairman of the United Egg Producers and served on their animal welfare committee and the North Central Poultry Association, a past president. And really, that comes down to I give all the credit to my father. I asked him
Mhm.
a long time ago, I said, Dad, why do you do that? And he said, Well, number one, it's our job to leave the industry in a better place than we found it. And that's part of our job and part of our responsibility. And so it's also good business, don't get me wrong, but I really enjoy doing it. As far as opportunities and demand, I probably should have said it in one of the biggest challenges. I don't think it's any surprise that there's a labor challenge in the US right now. We could literally hire 100 people tomorrow to round out our teams. But specifically, not only general labor, but in the managerial and the supervisory positions and the technical side of things, we've partnered with universities that are near to our operations, Iowa State, the Ohio State University, Oregon State University, and we try to build a pipeline of students that are coming up in the poultry science fields, agronomy, general business, marketing, the HR team, or as I like to call them, the people team, veterinary medicine. Just an example, our current veterinarian, we have two of them, but our youngest one came right out of Iowa State. She serves at many levels inside of our company, young woman, and is just knocking it out of the park. And as a direct hire right out of Iowa State, and I'd say I think she's doing quite well and enjoying her role. But also, we're always looking for farm kids. We're looking for kids that have been involved in their family farm operation because we're still agriculture, and it's having people that understand that kind of work and the fact that animal agriculture is simply 24/7. The birds don't take any time off and we need to have good work-life balance, but that's sometimes difficult to understand completely. Finally, I would say that Iowa State did a study. I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it was 2018 or 2019. That the Iowa egg industry contributes over 7,000 direct and indirect jobs in Iowa, and it adds $2 billion to the state economy. Now, that's not huge compared to some of the rest of the parts of agriculture, but absolutely there are opportunities right now, and particularly in the technical side, as I said, even some of our amazing success stories. I've got a guy that came to work for us, came out of the hog industry and has worked for us, boy, probably close to 20 years now. And he is our general manager for all of our Iowa operations. He's a partner now in the business and financially doing well. But just a good example, we are always looking for the people that fit our culture and that
Yeah.
understand the requirements and are willing to do some of that tough work. We have to be honest. It's not always the best smelling job. It's not always the cleanest environment. We're animal ag, but we can still figure that out. But yeah, there is opportunity and demand all over the place.
And even if you did grow up in a different industry, maybe your parents were doctors, or maybe your parents raised hogs in Iowa, right? There is no saying that you having no poultry experience is that it's not the place for you.
As an example, we just added a person out at our Ohio operation that came out of the automotive industry, and his role for us is going to be adding robotics and technical automation to our processing lines to make sure
Yeah.
that we're making the best product. There are absolutely tech jobs in a big way in our industry. As I said, our laying barns are all highly automated, and all the networking that goes with that, hundreds of sensors and all of the computer technology. And I actually have to kind of laugh because, as I said, I went to college for computer engineering, and I listen to our chief information officer now, and I feel like Charlie Brown sitting in class. I don't always understand, but no, the tech side of things, we're highly automated, lots of technology, and you're exactly right. You don't have to come from ag to find a spot.
Yeah. No matter what your passion is, there's probably a place for you in any sort of animal agriculture. That's pretty cool. Okay, JT, you are the expert of a lot of things when it comes to poultry, but I want to know personally, how are you keeping it rural?
So I live in a town of 8,000 people in Northwest Iowa. My wife and I, we're coming up on 25 years. We have five children, 21, 19, 17, 15, and 13. And I simply think rural communities in the Midwest are some of the best places to raise children. I love it that I have a 5-minute drive to the office and a 60-minute drive to the city and not the other way around. We just did our annual visit to the pumpkin patch. I love driving around and seeing the grain come out of the fields. And I'll go over to our feed mill and our grain systems at the farm. And I just love that watching the trucks come through. But having fire time with friends out at an acreage, I've got a buddy that raises just really one or two or three at a time, hogs and cattle. They're butchered at the local locker. I love to cook. I also cure meats and make my own sausages. And I guess I didn't grow up on the farm. I grew up in town, but living here, keeping a deep connection to the land and where our food comes from, and helping to be part of that food production system is, my passion and my mission. I wouldn't give up small town Iowa for anything.
That is a quote right there. Someone should put that on a t-shirt. No, that is pretty cool. And it's the small things. And so I'm glad you can enjoy that as well. I was starting to think when you said 8,000 people, that might be one of the bigger towns in Iowa.
Well, yeah, I live in Sioux County. So I think we're 20 something thousand people. We do have a couple good, strong Dutch communities here that are growing and exciting place to be. But it's definitely a growing community, but I'll still call it smaller. My wife grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and as my careers progressed, I kept moving her we lived in Iowa City and Ames, and then Spencer, and then Sioux Center. And she said that's about as small as she's comfortable with. So we've been here 18 years, and we plan on staying for the rest of the time.
I love it. It sounds like it's the perfect fit. Well, that is very exciting. JT, I can't tell you how much I've learned from this conversation and how much hope I have in the future of agriculture because of what we've talked about. You are a man that knows a lot and has experienced a lot. So listeners, there is definitely some reason to understand and trust what JT has said today. If we want more information, JT, where should we go?
Well, American Egg Board, their website is out there and tremendous amount of information. I talked a little bit about those standards under which eggs are produced. That's unitedeggproducers.org and American Humane Certified and Humane Farm Animal Care. You can Google those. There are a lot of great resources out there, but that American Egg Board website really is the powerhouse and a big part of getting information out about our industry and the things we do and the reasons why we do them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we want to thank you too for giving your time today and telling us about that incredible edible egg.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Keepin' It Rural listeners, you know where to find us. If you haven't already, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and make sure we're plugged into your Spotify and your Apple Podcast so you never miss a new episode of Keepin' It Rural. See you next time. It's not a party without you there. Follow Our Crazy on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to check out all episodes and extras at keepinitruralgirls.com.
That's all, folks.